Al arrived in Los Angeles at 10:30 a.m., rented a car from Avis, drove to the Town Place Suites, checked in, and arrived at the Institute by 3:33. Clarice, a receptionist, greeted Al and invited him to take a seat in the beautifully furnished modern lobby. Artwork littering the walls reflected the Institute's passions for knowledge and exploration. Al watched as Clarice dialed Nova's extension, and within minutes, Miss Slay presented in the lobby. "Mr. Gray," Nova said, and extending her hand. She was immediately attracted to Al, who immediately understood she was. Nova wore a tightly fitting skirt that easily measured 8 inches above her knees. Her blouse revealed just enough cleavage to attract, but not to invite. Al did appreciate her attractiveness as much as he had any woman, but he was clearly uninterested. "Mrs. Slay," Al said, not to fish for a possible husband or boyfriend, but to politely speak to his interest of keeping their encounter professional. He extended his hand to take hers. "It's Miss," Nova corrected emphatically as she took Al's hand. "Miss," Al corrected. Understanding the Mrs. statement went over her head. Nova escorted Al to an office as beautifully adorned and plush as the lobby and invited him to sit. The chairs were stylish and comfortable, and Nova chose one on the same side of her desk as Al's. She sat, crossed, and then turned bare legs toward Al. Al had wondered if the skirt would rise to the level of her navel when she sat, and he smiled when it adequately guarded her chastity. "Okay, Mr. Gray, you have my undivided attention. Where is the evidence you spoke about in our conversation?" Nova asked, and getting straight to the point. "A no-nonsense woman. You remind me a little of Claudia Black. Do you know who she is?" Al asked, the patented, impish, mischievous look on his face. "I can't say as I do," Nova said, wondering where the conversation was headed. "Didn't you ever watch Farscape? I would think it would have been one of your favorite series. She played the part of Erin Sun, the peacekeeper," Al explained, and leaning toward Nova. "I don't have much time for television," Nova said abruptly. Al sensed Nova disliked most anything that did not have to do with scientific research, and he was correct in his assumption. "You should watch it sometime, Miss Slay," Al said, smiling, his eyes continuing to sparkle with mischievousness. "Nova, please call me Nova," Nova said, and leaning toward Al. "Okay, Nova." "And you can call me Mr. Gray," Al said, leaning back, continuing to smile and look mischievous. "Fine, Al," Nova said, placing emphasis on his name and smiling as well. "Nova, do you have any colleagues who could join us? I don't want you to become frightened when I offer my evidence and end up screaming for someone to come in here," Al offered, and considering what effect the information he wanted to share might have. Nova eyed him suspiciously. She could not determine if he was crazy or simply playing with her. Finally, she said, "You show me what you have, and if I believe my colleagues would be interested, I will simply press the comm there and invite them to come in," Nova said, pointing toward an intercom on her phone. "Very well then. I am the proof. I am an alien," Al said, matter of fact, and raising his hands as if to say, "Here I am." Nova sat in silence, not moving. She was certain at this point that Al was, in fact, crazy, perhaps dangerous. "I believe I will have a colleague come in," Nova said, and trying not to appear obvious. Al, after leaning back and crossing his legs, laughed and mockingly asked, "Do you really believe security is going to be able to manage me if I'm an alien?" Nova froze at the phone. She turned and looked at Al, as though she was looking at a reptilian. "How did you know I was going to call security?" she asked, her voice unsteady. "That's what frightened people do when they believe they are in the presence of a madman, isn't it?" Al asked, and throwing his arms into the air once again. Nova returned to her chair, pulled it closer to Al's, sat, leaned forward so that she was within a foot of him, and said, "Okay, Al, you see? I'm not afraid of you. Prove to me that you are an alien. What would you like me to do? What about causing all the things on your desk to float in mid-air, like E.T. did with the fruit in the movie?" Al asked, uncrossing his legs, leaning forward so that he was within inches of her face, and pointing at Nova's cluttered desk. She could smell Al's breath, looked at his mouth, then his eyes, and calmed. Wondering if Al was truly crazy, Nova skeptically said, "Okay, Al. That would work. Go ahead and make things float." "Do you really think I could do that?" "Nova, it was a joke." Al laughed and pointing at the desk. "Standing," Nova said. "Mr. Gray, I believe you have wasted quite enough of my time. I agreed to this meeting because you had convinced me that you had some proof of extraterrestrial life. Now I find you are simply a flirt and trickster with some demented agenda. I would appreciate it if you would leave. Your father, Dr. Sean Slay, bought your first telescope for Christmas when you were 6. He had high hopes for you, but by the time you were 12, your grades in school were so terrible that you wondered if you would ever graduate from high school." Al began and settling back in his chair. "Which is something anyone could have learned from me," Nova said, and returning to her chair. Intrigued, she decided that perhaps there was more to Al than she suspected. After all, who would go to such lengths to learn these things about her unless they had an agenda? She decided it might be in her best interest to discover what the agenda was. "He told you that it was what is inside of you that made you, not what you could demonstrate with straight A's in school. He told you there were many who had made a mark on humanity who dropped out of college. He used Bill Gates as an example. You cried all night when your pet hamster, Druid, died because you opened your bedroom door and accidentally broke his neck." Al continued, placing his hands behind his head and resting further back in the chair, trying to come up with snippets from Nova's life to convince her of what he was. Nova paled and began to sweat. "You could have gotten that information by interviewing those whom I have known in the past," Nova offered weakly, but beginning to sense far in the recesses of her mind, Al was what he claimed to be. "I want you to think of someone who no one would know about. Think of some deep, dark secret from your past that you have never shared with anyone, not even your best friend, Evelyn," Al invited, again leaning toward her. "Why would I want to share something with a total stranger that I would not have shared with my best friend?" Nova asked, fearing Al was reading her. Suddenly, like a flash, a memory appeared and then, as quickly, disappeared. It was automatic and unintentional, knee-jerk. His name was James. You almost had sex with him under the high school bleachers one Saturday evening after a football game. He was supposed to play, but in the previous game, he had injured his ACL and had to sit the game out. He asked the coach for permission to watch the game from the bleachers so he could sit with you, Al said, his gaze even, unblinking. Nova turned ashen. "How? How?" She stammered, wide-eyed, then unable to speak. "Why is it that everyone on this planet, and especially in this organization, wants to meet an alien? Then when they do, they freak out and panic?" Al asked, and shaking his head. Then, walking over to Nova's desk, Al pushed the intercom button and said, "Could you please send someone in here? Nova is not feeling well." Within seconds, the door opened and several women and men, 2 of whom were security, barged through the door. Seeing Nova, ashen and sweating, one exclaimed, "It looks like she's having a heart attack." "She's just in shock," Al advised them. One man stepped within inches of Al and asked, "What did you do to her?" Recovering slightly, Nova said, "He didn't do anything to me." The man stepped back and asked Nova, "Are you all right?" "Yes. I would appreciate it if you and Tim would stay here. The rest of you can leave," Nova said, and dismissing her personnel. Reluctantly, all with the exception of Tim and Chad, the man who had confronted Al left the room. "Everyone grab a chair," Nova said, and sitting up. "Are you sure you're all right?" Tim asked, and offering Nova a bottle of Aquafina. "I will be," Nova assured, and fanning herself with a pamphlet she grabbed off of her desk. "What happened?" Chad asked, still eyeing Al suspiciously. "Gentlemen, I believe we may have met our first extraterrestrial." "Meet Mr. Alien Gray," Nova said, and fanning more rapidly.